Learning español can be quite a challenge.
Para mí es fácil.
Sí, but as a foreign language teacher, and since I had to learn Spanish myself, trust me, I speak to Spanish speakers every day.
Ali.
I know the struggles of learning a foreign language, but I also know how to make it easier, or más fácil, as we say in Spanish. Right, Arlette?
Hola.
So in today's video, I'm going to share my top tips to help you learn Spanish. Each tip is valuable, and I'll tell you why at the end of this video. So first, let's start off with one of my favorite, but not my favorite, tips, which is to watch movies or series, or both, in the language you're trying to learn. In this case, Spanish. There are 3 methods that you can use depending on what your level is and what you're looking to learn. The first and easiest level is watching the movie or series in your native language with Spanish subtitles. This will help you visualize the vocabulary and the way that sentences are structured while still being able to hear them in your native language. The second method is the reverse of the first, where now you watch the video in Spanish with subtitles in your native language. This method is mainly used for listening practice, to better fine-tune your understanding of the language. And it doesn't feel too overwhelming, since if there's something you don't understand, you can look at the subtitles in your native language. The third method is the hardest, and it is watching the video in Spanish with Spanish subtitles. With this method, you immerse yourself in the language and try to understand what you're listening to, while also seeing the structure through the subtitles. You can, of course, raise the difficulty by eliminating the subtitles completely, but I really don't recommend that unless you're at a more advanced level. All 3 of these methods are best for gaining an understanding of vocabulary and sentence structure. So by removing the subtitles, there are some phrases or words that you might end up missing out on. But one thing to note with this tip and these methods is that you should write down the words that you're learning and be sure to translate them as well.
Pero qué aburrido. No quiero.
It is boring, but sometimes words or phrases have different meanings depending on the context they're in. So it is important to write them down and translate them. My next tip is really good, but unfortunately it's not a tip that you can do by yourself. You see, as a foreign language teacher, I've noticed that giving my students a normal activity tends to be boring and really forgettable. But when I give them a competition, everyone wants to participate, everyone wants to outdo each other, and the whole process becomes a bigger experience and much easier to learn. And you'd think that this only works for kids, but I've had adult groups that were very competitive, and they always wanted to show off what they had learned.
Exacto. Y él es muy competitivo. Entonces ahora me vas a decir 3 palabras con la doble R en 5 segundos. 5.
¿Qué? ¡Ya!
4.
Carro.
3.
Pero.
2.
Pero, Karin!
¡Eh!
Okay. So my tip here is to find someone who is also interested in learning the language, so that way it feels like more of a competition and there's more incentive to learn. This goes hand in hand with my tip to practice. So 2 tips in 1. Some people might recommend a teacher or someone who knows the language 100%. And I'll talk about the benefits of a teacher in a bit. But for this tip, I'd rather you practice with someone who is also learning the language. That way, both of you have a desire to learn. Trust me, when you find someone who's also trying to learn the language, each experience becomes much more exciting. But if you want something you can do on your own, then how about listening to music? It's something that anyone can do, and you can listen to a wide variety of music depending on your tastes. Just try to avoid listening to Bad Bunny or other Spanish rappers if you want to speak it correctly. Also, don't just listen to the music and randomly expect to pick up words. You should start by listening to the music and reading the lyrics. Make sure you sing along to the lyrics, so that way you can practice your own fluency, and little by little, let go of the lyrics as you start learning them. This will both help you with fluency and your vocabulary. Listening to music is probably my simplest tip, but it can be quite effective if you tailor it to your needs. ¿Qué escuchas? ¿Qué escuchas?
Bad Bunny, Bad Bunny, Bad Bunny.
But going back to what I said about a teacher, my tip is to get a teacher only if you're ready to commit to having one. Having a teacher is definitely going to give you a boost when you're learning a language, since they can guide you when you're trying to learn that language. Teachers gauge your progress and see what you need to learn next, or if you need to go back and review a previous topic. But if you can't commit to a schedule or switch from teacher to teacher, then things aren't going to work out the way you want them to, or the way the teacher wants them to work out for you. Heck, as a teacher, I've had instances where students hire me, they leave for like 2 or 3 months, then they come back and they've lost everything they've learned. It's unfortunate, but that doesn't mean teachers aren't great. They are awesome. But only get one if you're willing to commit to a consistent schedule with a teacher.
Sí, y hoy yo fui su profesora y le enseñé una palabra. ¿Qué aprendiste hoy?
Velador.
Bien.
Wow, that's sad.
My 7th tip is actually my favorite, and it is just to read. Reading has a lot of benefits, but among my favorite are the fact that when you read, you gain vocabulary, you also gain sentence structure. Then we have the fact that with reading, you can do it by yourself, which means for those of you who are afraid of criticism or people laughing at you, it's very useful.
¡Ace! De ferrocarril.
No.
Filo.
Ferrocarril. So as you can see, having the chance to practice alone is never a bad thing. And you can use reading for more than just vocabulary and sentence structure, and the occasional practicing without having anyone bother you. You can also use reading to practice your speaking. I know it sounds strange, but when you read, you can read out loud. And when you read out loud, you can practice vocabulary, sentence structure, and more importantly, your fluency. I find it optimal that when you're reading, you take the time to read and reread so that you can read the first time at a normal speed in your mind. Then the second time, you read it out loud and try to read it a little bit faster. So as you can see, reading is really fantastic. The only thing it might not help you with is listening. Well, not even might not, it definitely won't, because I don't know if you can listen to books unless it's an audiobook. But for the most part, it has a lot of benefits. That being said, it is a bit more of an advanced technique, since you do need to have at least a beginning level of vocabulary, or you'd have to read really beginning basic books. And the way that the reading actually helps more is when you read books that you actually enjoy, which I'm not sure if a lot of people enjoy the more basic books, but it's typically more advanced and complicated books that people end up enjoying. But if you want a tip that will work no matter what level you're in, then one of, if not the most important tip I have, is a little something that I'm gonna call immersion. And that probably sounds a lot fancier than it is. Defining it in my own words, immersion is basically the act of surrounding yourself with the language you're trying to learn. You might already know the most common form of immersion, which is literally just going to the country of the language that you're trying to learn and just learning it with the people who live there. But if you're watching this video, then that's probably not what you're looking for. Now, if you want to put immersion into practice, here's a few ways that you can do so without having to travel to another country. So first, let's start with simple immersion. And I find that the best way to do this is to look at your environment and find the things that you don't know how to say in the language you're trying to learn, in this case Spanish, and then you use sticky notes, you write down the things that you don't know in Spanish on those sticky notes, and then afterwards you put them on the thing that you don't know how to say yet. And then every time you walk by that thing, you will always look at it not in the version of the language you already know, but with the language that you're trying to learn. And as time advances, once you've applied this technique, you can start quizzing yourself with the words that you've started learning. And before you look at the sticky note, you can start thinking, what was that word again? And guess what that word is. And little by little, start learning that vocabulary. Then we go on into intermediate immersion. And with this level of immersion, what I want you to do is to change your phone, configure it to the language you're trying to learn. This will help you start seeing the language, not just at home, but even out on the street, since you carry your phone around with you everywhere, I assume. And another thing you should do at this level is you should start watching movies and series in the language you're trying to learn. Very similar to the first tip that I gave you in this video. Then, for the advanced level of immersion, you need to take the plunge. which basically just means you need to start talking to and writing with someone who knows Spanish, because you need to start practicing it in order to get better at it. And you need to let someone correct you when you need correction. This part of immersion probably works best if you have a teacher, but you could, of course, make a friend who knows Spanish. Just know that people who are out and about in daily life typically are very busy, so they might not have time to sit down and write to you. On the other hand, it's a teacher's job, so you can coordinate with the teacher to organize a schedule to constantly write with them. You could do the same thing with a friend, but I can guarantee you that when it's for money, like it would be with a teacher, they're more likely to show up. With a friend, if anything else comes up, they might just not practice with you that day. That being said, if you do want to find some people to practice the language with who might actually have some time, try to look on Facebook, do a search for people like Learn Spanish, and you'll probably find a group where some people are willing to practice with you or just practicing and answering questions in general. And remember that as a teacher and as someone who lives in Ecuador, which is a Spanish-speaking country, I do have many friends who are native Spanish speakers who know English and are also teachers, or even just native Spanish speakers who would be willing to give strictly conversational classes. I'll leave my email in the description of this video if you'd like more information on that. And some people might say that immersion is the same thing as something called acquisition. And they are very similar, but here with what I'm trying to teach you today in immersion, I'm also trying to give you methods where you can use immersion and not have to travel to another country to acquire the language. And for some people, it might seem like the same thing, being able to understand and speak the language as just studying it and immersing yourself with the language. But it's not, because you will notice that native speakers of a language most of the time learn the language through acquisition. That's why they have a very hard time explaining the language when someone asks them, how did you make that sentence? Let me give you an example. Arlette!
Dime.
Arlette, do you know Spanish?
¿Sí?
Can you tell me something in Spanish?
Me gusta el anime.
Okay. Can you explain the structure of that sentence? Exactly.
A ver, dime tú repollo en inglés.
Chicken?
Buen intento.
You blew it.
So as you can see, this happens a lot to native speakers. But it's not necessarily a bad thing. It just means that they know the language, there's just things that they can't explain because they weren't taught how to explain them. So immersion is amazing. Like I said before, it is one of my most important tips. But even then, you can't overlook the other tips I gave in this video. Every tip is valuable, and you have to realize that not every tip is going to work for every person. You have to see what works for you. You also have to determine how fast or how long you want it to take for you to learn the language. Because while I did give all of these tips, when I was in the process of learning Spanish, I didn't follow these tips myself. What? And do you know what that cost me? It made me take 2 years to learn the language.
¿Y si lo aprendiste bien?
Pues no lo sé, dime tú.
Más o menos.
Hey,
Está bien, sí, sí.
I can definitely speak it now, but I could have probably learned it much faster had I actually sat down and studied or had these tips. And remember, you're constantly learning every day, because even me, with my English and Spanish, I'm constantly learning new vocabulary, new ways to explain the languages in order to help myself and to help others learn. So never stop with what you know, and always try to get a little bit more knowledge, because knowledge is power, and it's always worth it.
Practiquen y así van a aprender mucho. Así como mi amigo.
What she said. Make sure you take care,
Nos vemos pronto.
and as always, ace out.
Chao.
Methods? Increíble, porque hoy es feriado. Okay.
Cuando dejes sonar esa vaina. Ah, ya, se fue. Ay, pero... No me sale. Es que en una sí me puse nerviosa. Es que se me olvida el doble R.